All right, the sweaty season is here. We need our air conditioning in our cars. Well, a lot of the things that we think we know about air conditioning really aren't true. Now, one of the most common problems you're going to see is where your air conditioning makes this clicking sound under the hood. It goes click, click, click. Well, that's the air conditioning compressor clutch engaging and disengaging. And when it does it rapidly like that, it's saying that there isn't enough refrigerant in the system. See, the system has pressure switches and so on, and to protect the expensive parts of the system, if the refrigerant gets low, it shuts down the compressor. All right, well, whenever you have refrigerant that leaves the system, well, you have either a rapid or a slow leak. But the only way for it to get out is to leak out. There are no mysteries here. All right, if it's been 1 year or less since the last recharge of the system, the last time you put refrigerant in, well, that means you've got a pretty substantial leak. But if it is 4 years or close to it or more, that is normal leakage, and probably you don't need any repair. But here's where a lot of people go wrong. You see, inside each one of these charge ports, this is where we take our gauge readings for pressures and so on, and where we put the refrigerant into the system, down inside each one of those is a Schrader valve. We have some set out here. Now, these are very similar to what we have in a tire valve stem. They're a little different because they're designed to maintain the refrigerant instead of air. Now, everybody seems to think that those Schrader valves, that those are the primary seals on these ports. But in reality, they aren't. The caps themselves are the primary seal. Now, here we can see why. We've cut one in two, and you can see that there's a gasket. There'll be a gasket or an O-ring up in the top of that, and when we tighten this down, it fits against this smooth edge of the charge port, and it makes a refrigerant-tight seal. So, those need to be replaced periodically, and if they're missing, well, you should go out and buy a couple of them. They're $3, $4 a piece, and install them on your car, because that could keep the refrigerant in the car a lot longer, and it's very inexpensive. All right, so that's number one. Number two, we automatically assume when we have no cooling inside that it's got to be something major. Well, if we look behind me here, we have examples of things that can kill air conditioning. The front of the condenser, or between the condenser and the radiator up in the front of the car, it often gets clogged up with leaves, which might make the car overheat, but it always makes the air conditioning perform poorly. So make sure that everything up there in the front of the car is clean and working properly. Next is the cooling fan. In order for air conditioning to work, we have to have a lot of air moving through the condenser. Well, cooling fans frequently, they get tired with age and they don't turn as fast as they should. And the slower they turn, the less efficient your air conditioning will be. All right, so always check the cooling fans. Next is in the evaporator. This critter is up under the dash of the car, and here we see one where there was a nasty bunch of something that lived in there and left all of its residue and so on, and not a nice situation. And consider this, that also you're breathing air that has come through all of that. Not a healthy situation. So these are all things that need to be checked. Now, suppose you've checked all of the basics and you find that you need new refrigerant, or you need to have the refrigerant topped off or added to. Now, topping off is not a smart thing these days. Many of these air conditioning systems are very, very precise on the amount of refrigerant they require. So, in order to get the right amount of refrigerant into the system, you need to have a set of gauges, such as we see here. There's a high side and a low side. Now, air conditioning, you can't tell what's going on by one gauge. You have to have both of them, and whether it's going to work right or not is going to depend on the comparison between the low side reading and the high side reading. So it's the differential between the two. If you put just a high side gauge on there, it's not going to tell you much. Put just a low side gauge on there, it's not going to tell you much either. So this is the way we do it. Okay, now we also have to figure out where the refrigerant left the system. Now, one way you can do that is you can look around. If you see oily spots on some of the lines or something like that, that usually indicates a leak. But maybe you don't see anything like that. Then you need to go to your local parts store and you need to rent one of these. This is an electronic leak detector, and it responds to the chemicals in refrigerant. And we simply fire one of these up and we go along the various fittings and everything until it starts beeping like crazy at us. And then what we do is we move in one direction. All right, the beeping gets slower, less intense. We come back, it gets more intense, and then we move over the leak in the other direction, and it starts to drop off again. And that way we can zero in on the exact leak. Now, another thing, if you have your work done at a shop, they're probably going to add oil to the system, and the oil, like we have here, is going to have dye in it. And for the next time around, well, this dye is going to come out with the refrigerant, and you take a Blacklight and you shine it along the various parts of the AC system, and where the dye comes out, it will glow. The Blacklight makes it glow, and that way you know exactly where your leak is. Now, if they're not putting oil in it, they can just put regular dye in it. Comes in a little bottle like that, and it saves a lot of time and money in diagnosing. Now, another thing that you have to consider, here we have some examples of do-it-yourself products. Well, they may work providing you follow all of the directions, but you have to keep in mind they only have one gauge on them. So you can't do any diagnostic work or anything like that. You have to have two gauges in order to diagnose an AC problem. So follow the directions and hope that they work for you. If they don't, then you're going to need a pro who knows how to use two gauges properly. Now, finally, that dirty evaporator back here, this one where the critters were living, one of the things that you should be doing on a regular basis is products like this. Here we have BG Fridgey Clean. This is a product that is very aggressive. It gets sprayed into the air intake, which is right above that evaporator, and this stuff foams up and cleans all of that crud away. Something that in many cars should be done, probably once every 1 to 2 years. This will also do away with the odors that air conditioning systems get. You know, air conditioning frequently smells like dirty sweat socks or something worse. Well, that's mold and mildew that has built up in the system. This will clean that away and make it smell better and make it a lot healthier. For maintenance, they have this one, which not nearly as aggressive, but also helps to keep things smelling much better. And if you follow the rules with air conditioning, it'll work for years and years. Probably you won't have any problems or any major expenses. Do it wrong, and in a matter of seconds, you can blow up a $1,000 compressor and be hating life.